I'm Peter Kolb. I'm the Montana State University Extension Forestry Specialist. I'm employed through Montana State University. I'm housed at the University of Montana, where the College of Forestry and Conservation is. So I collaborate with both universities. My primary audience is private forest landowners, but my specialty is really forest ecology, forest management. So I work a lot with the Montana Logging Association, the State Department of Forestry, or DNRC. So I'm really kind of a bridge between the research world and the applied world of forest management.
Very good, and I also should comment that this presentation is also built on material from our colleague at Colorado State, Tim Reeder. He could not join us this afternoon, but Extension, we certainly do work as a team. And I would like to follow Sarah Strauss's cue and have folks introduce themselves to understand who's on the call. We certainly know what the education group is doing, but it's always good to get a feel and have a little bit more of a conversational discussion than passive listening. So with that, I guess we can sort of work through the list. Maybe we'll start with Amanda Morrison and work our way down.
Yeah, that's fine. This is Amanda. I'm at Colorado State University in the Natural Resource Ecology Lab. I do the K-12 education for the NREL and am helping lead efforts in Colorado for the education team for BANR.
Very good.
And I'm Sarah Bucko. I teach biology and environmental science at Loveland High School in Loveland, Colorado.
Welcome.
My name is Logan Mannix, and I teach at Capitol High School in Helena, Montana, and I teach biology and earth science here.
Excellent.
My name is Lorianne Muchmore. I teach down in Stevensville. I teach 6th, 7th, and 8th grade science.
Once again, welcome.
Thanks.
And we have Sarah on as well. Just the geographic context is especially useful.
Yep, and I'm Sarah Urban, and I actually at the same high school as Logan does, and we are in Helena, and I teach biology.
Wonderful. Okay, so now I'm muted, unmuted, and I hope that Peter is as well. Peter, are you unmuted? Well, I guess not. So I will take the lead to get us started.
I can mute people. Maybe I'll unmute everybody and mute them individually, and maybe that'll help Peter be unmuted.
Okay, sorry to make this as challenging as possible.
We also have Mary Hunter Laszlo, who just got on, so so she can introduce herself as well.
Hello, Mary. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
All right. Now, where are you located, Mary? We're just getting a little geographic context, sort of introducing ourselves for the benefit of Peter and I.
All right, Colorado. At Preston, Middle School.
Okay. Well, welcome.
Okay. Is Peter unmuted now?
I mute myself unless I'm talking. I just hit the mute button on my phone.
Okay, you're good. Good to go.
All right. Now that we've made it through any potential technical difficulties, once again, welcome. And this is an overview of the Extension and Outreach Task Team. And to get us started, I was going to give you just a basic overview of Extension as a whole, as I do recognize that we throw this term around, especially when we talk about forestry or ag-related projects at Extension, but what is it? And I really like this quote out of a colleague out of Oregon State. When we look at Extension, we talk about engagement, and we are the extension and outreach team, but outreach begins with an answer. Think of the traditional model where an expert from the university might descend from the ivory tower on high, and I hope Peter doesn't mind me making fun of academics, because I know he is not one of the academic folks descending from the ivory, or staying up in the ivory tower rather. But if outreach begins with an answer, engagement ends with one, and that's really the spirit of extension. We engage in a community where we bring relevant information, but we also bring feedback to the research project. And I know you've seen a similar slide. I bet you Dan Tinker probably gave it to you as well. But if we look at the project task overview, you actually see those arrows going both ways, in and out of extension, outreach, health, and safety. We really want to emphasize that when a land-grant institution, and if you're not familiar with land-grant, each state generally has one, and they're tasked with extension-type activities. If we're doing our job, we're bringing information to the community, but we're also taking information back to continue to guide the research project, recognizing that something like BANR is only relevant when it does get applied by the practitioners in the forest products industry, entrepreneurs, and acceptance by communities. And also acknowledging that as an unbiased resource, it's our duty to bring a positive opportunity, but also to inform people that, hey, after you look at all your options, if no action is an informed decision, that's an acceptable decision as well. And Peter, you want to explain a bit further on how you bring that into the forestry realm in particular?
Well, sure. So as I mentioned earlier, my clientele are private landowners, loggers, and foresters out in the field. But as Milt said, and I completely concur, another one of my clienteles is the ivory tower, the world of research. And, you know, to explain that, these days, at least, every little facet of science is a very in-depth process. It's a very in-depth topic that requires a lot of reading just to stay current on your specific area of expertise, as well as adding your own research emphasis to it. And so if you're doing that well, it's pretty hard to also stay in touch with the practitioners, the people out in the field. And when you think that extension actually started as assistance to farmers, where a research branch was helping farmers do a better job growing their crops and addressing certain problems, it is an avenue to bring core sciences to the practitioner, but as Milt said, to bring the relevant questions that practitioners have back to the core research community. And as such, extension folks have a foot in both camps. So I work with landowners. As the top picture, that's a workshop we did for forest landowners, teaching them basics of tree identification, how trees grow, tree density, forest management, and all of the ecosystem processes that go on in a forest. The second one is actually a meeting with an organization called Tree Farm, an annual conference where we were showing equipment that's both for sale and, in this case, modified by the landowner to help them do their forest land practices. And that bottom picture is working with some loggers, and that's a forwarder that uses cut-to-length technology. So we need to stay current on what's possible out there. And you know, as it relates to BANR, where we're thinking about, if this project goes to fruition, of moving massive quantities of dead, unusable wood out of the forest, there will be technological innovations required to do that. And so an important component in this project is the logging community. And since they're the ones that do the work, we need to ask them the relevant questions. So just a month ago, I held a workshop with the logging community, and we went up into beetle-killed forests. And basically, I was asking them, okay, what do you need to get this out of the forest? Do you need to modify your equipment? How? What kind of investments do you need? Is this of interest? What are the safety concerns? You know, dead trees are different to harvest than live trees, etc. So really, you know, we're looking at the research from the aspect of the innovations of turning wood into gasoline, which is a chemical breakdown process. We're looking at the logistics of having to move that stuff. We're looking at existing infrastructure and communities as to, are they interested in this? What kind of investment do they need? If they're going to invest, how many years worth of work do they need to have in order to pay off their investment? So you know, in some ways, I sometimes liken what we do as the grease that makes the wheels turn, or it makes the wheels turn better. And you know, so in forestry, that's a multiple step process, because by the time you get a sheet of paper to when it was a tree in the forest, there's about 12 steps in there, and each of them has their own specific requirements and needs, both from a workforce and a technology perspective, but also from a health and safety and environmental concerns process. So trying to put the whole picture together and grease the wheels between the different components of each of those steps is a lot of what we do.
Okay, thank you for that, Peter. And I was just putting in the chat box, but do feel free to ask questions as we proceed if you want clarification. So just bring it into the chat box. We'll incorporate the question into our discussion. Like I said, we prefer not to just present at you. We'd much rather have a conversation with you. Okay, so we understand a little bit about what extension is, but how do we bring these extension principles to the BANR project, to this large educational research, even a business component? How do we integrate that into the project? So we recognize that we've got a problem. Many perceive it as a problem, at least, of an underutilized forest woody debris. We have an audience, a very diverse audience. We recognize, as Peter was alluding to, the private forest landowners. We have industry that's necessary, land agencies, municipalities, and the general public. That's a very broad demographic to reach and to provide relevant information. We can't just bombard somebody with too much technical information, nor do we wish to insult them by not providing the relevant information that they came to seek. And we have these core issues. How much is there? Is it economically viable? Can it be collected and processed? What are the impacts? And who is researching the issues, and do they match the problem? That's really where we get at the key core of extension. Who is researching it, and can we address what this perceived problem is? Okay, so where did we start? So matching the research objectives with the on-the-ground issues, which once again Peter alluded to there. Figuring out who we needed to be working with in these communities. In many cases, it's a very specific community, but also across the project area. If we look at Colorado, Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho, I can assure you that Wyoming has a much different forest products industry than Montana or Idaho, or even Colorado, much less developed, much more, much greater distance and fewer actors in the community. So identifying the partners across the different states, but once again, bringing those similarities as we develop products to make sure that they're relevant across the different states. And then getting these concepts to those stakeholders, bringing their feedback back to the project, either in an informal conversation or also through structured focus groups and other things that Colorado is pursuing. Interacting those research tasks to communicate these stakeholder concerns, so trying to be plugged into these different tasks that you've been exposed to in the series of webinars. And actually, extension folks are assigned to each task and attempt to integrate the best that we can. The representative research sites, which I know you've heard about, obviously that has tremendous community impacts. Well, not just impacts, but a need for education that comes with it, and a need for education on their terms, and that's where extension certainly has a role to play. And review, monitor, review again, communicate, review, monitor, communicate. Do you see a process there? Well, once again, that communication part is something that is really emphasized in any project like this, and especially projects that come out of USDA. And feel free to jump in anytime.
If I might pipe in on that last part, it seems like a lot of words, but you know, think about researching an issue as complex as removing dead wood out of the forest and bringing it to a processing site where it's ground up to be turned into a chemical reduction process of making it into gasoline. It may sound simple, and so some of the questions, the research questions might be, what kind of equipment can we use to effectively collect this dead woody material? But as we do it, we might realize that the equipment that's most efficient at picking up dead woody material is having some significant impacts on soils as it's doing it. So then we come back and say, okay, here's something that will do it efficiently, but say it's a bulldozer with a bucket on the front, but it's really grinding the heck out of the soil, and we really want to avoid that kind of damage to the site. So is it possible to do it with a rubber-tired machinery, or is it possible for a helicopter to come in with a grapple and pull this stuff out without having to build new roads? And so then we look at those processes and those questions, and new questions come up. And so the key behind this process-based research, where we actually have an end product that we want to create, is we have to make sure that the questions we're asking out in the field, as they raise new questions, that they stay on task and that they're really meeting what our end goal here is. And the end goal is to be able to get this material in an economically efficient but ecologically sensitive way out of the forest. And so that's why we need to have this continual feedback. And again, Extension, we're kind of very adept at doing that, because in the BANR project, there's multiple tasks looking at ecological impacts, looking at forest management, what's the impact on residual trees when we remove this material, and there's all these different scenarios. And when you're really focused in on one thing, you tend not to be looking at the other things that much. And so in Extension, we're constantly monitoring all of the different research components in here and trying to see whether it will work as a whole. So that's kind of why this review, monitor, and then talk to the different players in all of this. Because science and education and research for research's sake is good, but in particular this project, it's at some point in time it has to actually produce a viable product. And that's kind of where we're really focused on, is that at the end of 5 years in all this research, we want to have at least enough knowledge that we could approach this in a way that will be the most beneficial to all the stakeholders involved in this project. So back to you, Milt.
Well said, Peter. And actually, I'll turn it back to you where you talk about the situation. I know you guys have gotten somewhat of an overview here as I look back at the previous presentations you had, but once again, I think it's important to get it in the Extension context outside the more traditional research framework.
Well, I threw in a few slides here, and I'm sure you've all seen red trees on the landscape. This just happens to be lodgepole pine in the East Garnets of Montana, so about 50 miles east of Missoula. And when you look at that landscape, you see a lot of red trees. When you walk into that forest, this is kind of what you see there. And okay, so first impression is there's a lot of material out there, but access is important. To move it out, you need to have roads, and putting new roads in might add more sediment to certain streams. Logging roads tend to be the biggest producers of sediment if they're not put in appropriately. It's a low value material, so the further distances you have to pull it out with a skidder or a dozer, the more expensive it becomes. So you want more roads, but how do you get the roads in there? So this comes into, okay, if we're going to harvest this stuff, how are we going to do it in a sensitive way? The other option is to leave it alone. So if we can move to the next slide, I think.
And actually, it's not going on you, Peter. The core BANR question, just to make sure that we give you something succinct here, is simply this: that drop-in transportation fuel, soil amendments have become an increasingly large part of the project, as I'm sure you're aware with your biochar activities, and provide that yes, no, or at least a very informed maybe. And I think it's important for us in particular to keep in mind, because there's so many things that we could go. Peter could spend lots of times with forestry management issues, and I'd love to talk about energy and the other uses of biofuels and how it fits in our broader energy security, the energy balance, the carbon balance, but we have to remember that we do have a key question that we have to make sure that Extension continues to inform. Now with that little segue, Peter, I'll turn you back into your sort of pictorial tour of what we need to do here.
Okay, well, I mean, as we go on this process to ask these questions, what we want to avoid at all costs, because it doesn't work, is for us as academics to go to landowners and loggers and saying, here's what you need to do. because these folks already are aware of an issue. They're working with it. They have their own ideas. They have a lot of knowledge, experiential knowledge, also some academic knowledge. So as we go along these steps, one of the first things we do is we want to take our primary stakeholders, and as I mentioned, loggers before, but landowners as well. Forest products industry, they're a player in this, because all those dead trees aren't just waste material. You can cut boards from them. And so in Montana, we have an existing sawmill structure. So if we say, hey, we're going to bring in this new industry that's federally subsidized, that's going to produce gasoline out of trees, and oh, by the way, it's going to compete with you, a tax-paying company, for the limited logs that you're fighting to get, that doesn't go over too well. So everybody needs to be in on this from the get-go, and we're presenting this concept to them and getting their feedback. And so far, the feedback we've gotten is very positive, because in any commercial logging process, about 30 to 40% of the weight that is harvested is non-usable. That's the treetops and the crooked stems, the material that you can't send through a sawmill or that you can't debark and turn into paper pulp for making paper. So that 30% is being harvested, but it's not being used. So most of the loggers are all gung-ho for this. They just as soon find a market for it. And so, this is a step that we've already done. Likewise, under the BANR project, the final processing plant would be a chemical conversion plant that uses pyrolysis, oxygen-free heating, to produce basically crude oil that is refined to high-octane gasoline. Well, there's infrastructure requirements. They need power. When you take wood and you heat it, there's a lot of water in wood, and so you produce something to the order, from what I've heard, 100,000 gallons of wastewater a day. Well, you can't just dump that into a stream or a pond, so you need to locate a plant in a community that has the capacity to handle that kind of water. And so that's where community leaders need to be talked to. Likewise, if you basically have a refinery that's producing gasoline, well, I don't know if you live in an existing community and your home is there and your school is there, and someone's going to plunk a refinery right in the middle of town, that might not sit well with you. And so, that's another very important aspect in all of this, that one, what we're doing is what people want. Two, that it's, again, going to create jobs and be economically feasible. And three, and this isn't necessarily an order of ranking of importance, three is that it's done in an ecologically sensitive way, so that we're not going to screw up the streams, we're not going to create traffic problems, we're not going to mess up the forest and cause further problems. So, yeah. So, as I mentioned earlier slide, so that we have this hypothetical where we want to go and remove this stuff, this material. The other one is, okay, what happens if we leave it in place? So the next couple of slides, so you want to plunk in the next ones there. Here's two scenarios about 8 years into, let's back off of that one, Milt, real quick. Back to the other two. So when bark beetles go into a lodgepole pine stand, they reproduce by boring into the bark, laying their eggs, and the eggs hatch into larvae that feed on the nutrient-rich cambium layer just under the bark, which in turn kills the tree. Those dead standing trees eventually fall over, and for lodgepole pine, it's going to be somewhere between 5 and 15 years. These pictures are of a site that was hit by a mountain pine beetle attack 7 years ago, and this is what it looks like now. And so if you're looking for lynx habitat, some of this is pretty good, because the lynx like to den in this kind of downed woody debris. On the other hand, if you have 1 million acres homogeneously that looks like this, then there's an issue, because if you get a fire in there, there is no fighting a fire in this kind of fuel loading. You just got to let it roar, and then you're going to end up with 1 million acres of black, severely burned site, and the ash and the sediment and the smoke and everything else that comes with that. Alternatively, now you can go on to the next one, Milt. Next slide, please. There we go. Alternatively, if you harvest it, and currently the dead material, if it's too far gone, is of no value, and so this area was harvested for the green trees for a sawmill, there's no use for this material. And so there's different thought processes that go into play here. One of them is that woody debris decomposes into humus, which is an important soil component. So the more woody debris you leave on a site, actually, the better the site will be, because it's going to increase the fertility and the productivity of the site. That was the first thought on this. Unfortunately, wood has almost no soil nutritional quality. It's cellulose, lignin, and hemicellulose, which is just carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. There's no nitrogen, phosphorus, or potassium in it, or extremely minuscule amounts. So this site, as opposed to other sites that were more cleaned up, or where more of the woody debris was collected, this site has not reforested very well. And the species you see out there are alder and lupin, which have the capacity to fix nitrogen, because they have a symbiotic relationship with rhizobium bacteria that can pull nitrogen out of the air. Nothing else really grows there well, because the fungi that are trying to eat the wood have to extract all the nitrogen out of the soil that's existing there in order to be able to digest that wood. So a site like this, there's all sorts of things going on, and what at first might have been a good idea actually turns out to be a bad idea. And so, you know, there are concerns here, because this isn't reforesting. There isn't the kind of vegetation that you would normally see on a site like this. The best that could probably happen is that this burns, but then there are consequences to that as well. So, you know, these are some of the things we're looking at, and this is actually one of the study sites that the Ecology Task Force is going to look at, and they're going to look at nutrient cycling processes on this site, and one where 90% of that woody debris was removed off of the site, and it's now actually regenerating pretty well to forest. So we want to really look at the nutrient dynamics that are going on out there. So, Milt, anything you want to add to that?
No, and I think you alluded to, but just to stay clear, Beth asked, you know, precisely where is this site? So maybe just a little bit more context for folks.
This is at about 6,000 feet in Lubrecht Experimental Forest in the Garnet Range. So this is actually, if you were to go up Elk Creek Drainage and then go up Cap Wallace Gulch Road, which is on the school forest, it's usually gated. This is actually about 10 miles up that road. And this is the edge of a large lodgepole pine ecosystem that stretches a long ways across the Garnets and encompasses probably about 500,000 acres. And so the previous two slides are of the surrounding forest, and this is actually a clear cut that was put in 7 years ago to harvest the merchantable wood that was on that site, but without a market for the non-merchantable material. So, you know, this is an example of, if we're looking at alternative scenarios, okay, if we harvest trees for our sawmills, and lodgepole pine in its ecology typically will burn at anywhere from 80 to 200 years of age, and it burns as a standard placing fire. It has the closed serotinous cones that open with the heat and release seeds, and so lodgepole pine is somewhat dependent on these burns to regenerate, though clear cutting can do the same type of thing, because those cones, when they're on the hot soil surface, just hot enough from the sun, the cones also open and we get prolific regeneration as well. Except when we leave all this woody debris, because those tiny little seeds, to germinate, have to land on mineral soil. That gives them enough contact for that little root that comes out of that seed to find water. If these seeds land on this organic debris, that root that will extend out about 4 centimeters has to come in contact with water. This woody debris dries out in the summer, and all those little seedlings die, which is why you see very little conifer regeneration on this site. Perhaps more than you wanted to know.
Very, very detailed. But we also have another great question for Mary. She's asking why, when the trees are too far gone, are they not usable for liquid fuel? Carbon is still there. What is missing? And I'll take a first swing at that. Having visited Cool Planet's facility, one, they do have a feedstock specification. I bet you Peter's going to talk about getting the stuff that's too far out of there, out of the forest, but we'll assume it could actually come out of the forest. And Cool Planet, you can't just feed anything into their equipment. They hopefully have a greater range of tolerances, but stuff that is too far, has some decomposition, is a little bit softer, other things like that, just from their, at least at their first go with their process, doesn't seem to be an ideal fuel. And we say ideal, you know, if it gums up a system and they lose a batch and increase maintenance costs, and that wood waste certainly has a unique challenge. But I bet you want to add about getting that stuff out of there, Peter.
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, this doesn't, the beetle-killed trees, if I heard your question correctly, are usable in sawmills until the stems start to dry out and crack. And when they crack, particularly if they crack in a spiral fashion around the stem, if you cut a 2x4 out of it, the 2x4 is going to break in half or fall in half. So that's why beetle-killed material, and it depends on the species. Lodgepole pine can be utilized all the way up to 8 years after it's beetle killed, but it all depends on how it dries and how it cracks. So this stuff left behind apparently was too cracked to be able to be utilized in our existing sawmills for boards. Now, as Milt said, for a cool planet, it's pyrolysis, which basically they're heating it to about, I believe, 500 degrees centigrade without oxygen. And what that does is it breaks down, when we look at this wood, about 50% of it is cellulose and 50% of it is lignin. And lignin is an incredibly complex molecule, and there's many types of lignin. And that's when wood rots, what's left is that brown, crumbly material, what we call humus. That's the lignin. And that may persist in the soil for up to 1,000 years. That's how stable it is. Of course, stability is another word for non-digestible. Okay, nothing can eat it because it's too complicated for it to be broken down in any digestive system and provide some energy back. So likewise in pyrolysis, and I'm not a biochemist when it gets down to the nuts and bolts of that, but it's largely the cellulose that gets converted into the complex carbohydrates, the benzene rings, what's the other one? Benzene, and there's another one that are the main components of gasoline. It's the cellulose that gets converted into that more than the lignin. And so when it gets too decomposed, then your yield is too low out of that. But any biomass you put into a pyrolysis system, the crude oil you get out of it is going to vary based on the composition of the biomass you put into it. I mean, theoretically, you could put dead cows into a pyrolysis system and get some form of carbon crude out of it, but how you refine it further is then going to depend on what you get out of there. And imagine you're operating a system like this where you're processing 100 tons of material a day. If every batch is different in its chemical composition, then the crude you get out of there is going to be different in chemical composition. It needs a different refining process, which gets prohibitively expensive, and you're not going to make any money out of it. And that's why in any of these systems you want consistent fuel that is similar in its characteristic and in the yield that it's going to produce.
And I'll emphasize, and I don't want to ruin Peter's visual of having dead cows fed into a pyrolysis machine, but the other thing here is remember that Cool Planet is looking at a biochar product as well, and certainly the biochar is highly dependent, even more so than the oil product, on what is put into the feed, into the process. So it makes it so it's tough to harvest and tough to market that premium product that hopes adds enough value to this to make it economically viable.
Yeah, think of every tree species as a different crop. I mean, you can make ethanol out of corn, you can make ethanol out of barley, you can make ethanol out of rice, but each one requires a different process. And so it is if you make it out of Douglas fir versus ponderosa pine versus lodgepole pine versus half-rotten lodgepole pine, each one is going to require a different process. So, again, you know, our baseline is always we want to look at, okay, what are we currently doing? So if we harvest this material and we pull it out of the forest, there may be some impacts, and some of them may be positive, some of them might be slightly negative. And we need to balance that against what is the existing practice. So, you know, we talked about beetle-killed trees. I put this slide in. This is a lodgepole harvesting unit on the Rocky Boy Reservation. Most tribes have a very active forestry program going on. And this is just a pile of residue of material they could not use. So, as I mentioned earlier, if you're paying someone or paying equipment, and modern logging equipment is highly technical, it's highly expensive. So the average logging contractor now has at least $1 million invested in their equipment. They need a harvester, They need a forwarder or a skidder of some sort. They need a delimber. They need a loader, and they need a logging truck. And those pieces of equipment all combined are well over $1 million of investment. And so your investment pays back by working for you. And if 30% of your time is hauling this stuff out, but now you have no market for it, and if we go to the next slide, Milt, if you have no market for it and now treating this, the current way of treating that is to light it on fire and burn it. So this is the same piles, and the tribe burned them. And so we're producing smoke out of this. Pyrolysis is a much cleaner system. You're not getting all the particulates and the carbon monoxide and the carbon dioxide out of it. So if there's negative impacts with harvesting it and turning into gasoline, the alternative is right now, you can't leave it out there because this is a tremendous fire hazard. In a year, it's extremely dried out. You get a lightning strike. This pile is going to produce a flame that's 30 feet high. That's going to throw embers into the surrounding forest. So right now, they're burned in controlled conditions, typically in the fall when it's raining or after the first snow. And yeah, burning it is a cost because you have to have people there and you have to have water on site to make sure that this fire is contained. So any questions on that, or Milt, do you want to add anything? So, okay, the next step, and I already mentioned this, but so you find a market for this material. This is rough terrain, not where this piece of equipment is standing, but this is the kind of equipment. This is a forwarder. It's been modified to haul woody debris off of a site. This is actually a logger friend of mine who was working for pipelines and was clearing pipeline ground. And they had to move this material off site. Well, this is potential biomass. And imagine what the miles per gallon are with this piece of equipment. Imagine that this, well, don't imagine this, this particular forwarder costs $450,000. Okay, so it needs to be earning money to pay itself off because in 10 years it's depreciated enough where it's not worth anything anymore. So in 10 years you got to pay yourself a salary and you got to pay off this piece of equipment. And is this the appropriate equipment? This has high flotation tires, so soil impacts are low, but high flotation tires also mean low miles per gallon, inefficient travel, but it can travel long distances without a road. So these are all trade-offs that need to be examined and measured to see what is the optimum way to do this, where you're protecting the environment, but you're still keeping the process ecologically feasible.
And I will just chime in there when you say miles per gallon, it may likely be gallons per mile. And also remember in the broader energy context, we're looking at the energy balance of this material, that what it takes to get it out of the forest to deliver what is being billed as a low carbon renewable fuel. So we have to remember that in this broader context as well. So not only does it have to pencil out, shall we say, to the practitioners actually extracting the material, but also if we look at this as a broader national policy, we would hope to have a favorable energy balance. And once again, we're familiar with that discussion in the context of other biofuels as well.
And as I mentioned earlier, they don't make equipment simply to move biomass. Okay, so that forwarder was actually modified by the operator so that he could move that material off the site because he was required to move it. You can't go into an equipment dealer and say, hey, I want a forwarder that I can move fine woody debris with, because these are designed to move log decks, logs that are at least 16 feet long that you can stack. It has a boom attached to it. You can't really see it, but it's tucked off to the side. And that boom has a grapple designed to grab logs, not fine twigs and woody brush. So this particular operator had to invest about $5,000 and a week of his time custom retrofitting this piece of equipment to haul this material. So these are all some of the issues involved. So now we can move on to the next slide. So, and likewise, you get this, this is right now, this is a material that goes to the BANR chipping facility. This is all usable for paper pulp. But I took this picture because this is pretty close to also what might be used for a biomass unit. And so it's small diameter, it's crooked, it's pretty squirrely to hold on to. So you transport this off the site. That previous piece of equipment would take that to a landing, then it gets loaded into a truck. The truck hauls it down to a collection site, which this would be, and now you have to move this stuff off, load it off the truck, and move it into a holding pile somewhere. And so how much do you think this piece of equipment costs? And again, as Milt alluded to previously, if part of the logic behind producing liquid fuels is to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels and how many fossil fuels we're blowing in the atmosphere and contributing towards potential global warming, then we also have to do a carbon analysis on there. And so out of this stack of wood, say we get 500 gallons of gasoline, but we just used 800 gallons of diesel and gasoline to get it to the refinery, then it's no longer carbon efficient or carbon neutral, and you might as well be better off just using fossil fuel than burning twice as much fossil fuel to produce half again as much of a biologically based fuel. So another factor in there. And then, as I mentioned earlier, processing. What would a processing plant look like? This is simply a chipping facility. And for pyrolysis to work, like the plant they're building in Louisiana, I believe that's running entirely off of loblolly pine wood chips. So the pre-processing would be very similar to this. Bark may be a contaminant in that. So here, this stuff gets put into a big drum at the left side of this facility. That drum rotates with the logs in there, and the logs rubbing against each other rubs the bark off. The bark actually goes to as beauty bark for landscaping. And then the wood is ground up in that big shack. There is a high-speed grinder that grinds those logs as fast as they go in there and makes these big piles of chips. From here on, the chips now would have to go into a biorefinery. These chips are being processed for paper pulp, and from BANR, Montana, they are railed all the way to central Washington to Boise Corp paper mill. So, this is a potentially competitive industry. And for this simple facility here to pay for itself, this facility itself was a $6 million investment. They have to run it for 5 years at a given price of chips to Boise Corporation in order to pay it off. And the quantity that they have to produce is 1 million tons of this material per year. So we're talking a very low value product that has to be moved in high volumes across incredibly difficult terrain with skilled operators to prevent ecological environmental damages. So our margin of return on this stuff is going to be minuscule. And so again, this is kind of some of the things that Milt and I do. I mean, Milt works on the energy side of things. I work partially on the logistics side. Our big question is, how do we make this work? And the difference between a logger that can move 20 tons of this material a day versus a logger that can move 30 tons of material a day may be the difference between this project working or not working.
And I think you're spot on there, Peter, that that processing component, we have to remember how invested communities are in this and also acknowledge, we won't call it inflamed emotions, but strong emotions tied to the forest products industry. So we have to make sure that when we bring BANR and the BANR discussion into a community, that we acknowledge the potential impacts and benefits, but at the same time don't build up false hope, because we know that biomass projects are littered across the West and actually across the entire country that have created high expectations and have been unable to deliver. So we want to make sure that we bring a appropriate skepticism to it, but also that hope that this is a problem that through basic research can be addressed. And with that, what are we doing moving forward? What are the tasks for Extension? Now, obviously, Extension is ideally suited when we have that research output to take it into a community. But as you've learned, the research is coming along. So where do we find ourselves in the near term? Certainly working that communication standpoint when we work with our other tasks, including education, and incorporating that BANR work into existing activities related to forest products, and renewable energy. So all of us already have an existing role that relates to this, as you've been hearing from Peter, and including myself, particularly on the energy component. How do we plug BANR into that and make sure that we're telling a complete story to our ultimate to our clientele, actually? There'll be a BANR webinar series that is much more geared not just towards educators, but to the ultimate recipients, to our stakeholders. Something that may be of interest to you is we certainly have funds for a video series where we have applied opportunities to bring folks out to help a visual. You can see with all the fantastic images that Peter brought that seeing this and understanding is very important. I'm sure you discovered that in some of your site visits as well. And we haven't mentioned it as much, but we need to bring biochar into that discussion because it is a very key component of making the economics fly on this. And we certainly recognize that Cool Planet is really banking that biochar has a significant value, and especially the biochar from this particular product. We need to bring our website up to stuff as everybody does, and also just those field activities. Not only do researchers, do educators like to get out in the field, but we have to acknowledge that that is also the place where our stakeholders can learn best. So those are some of the activities that we have moving forward. Things to add there, Peter?
I think you covered it very well.
And we do want to acknowledge that we sort of have a similar role to the education team when we talk about extension. That is really just education, our non-traditional learners, if you will. And how can we bring educators into this? Certainly participating in the local events, especially as we have more products to share, as we get engaged in the locations with the site assessments. You can participate as an educator, but also as a citizen. You're probably far more informed than many folks in the community, and we welcome those type of folks to engage. So certainly stay tuned if you're in those site areas in particular, wish to travel to engage in that. But also the forthcoming extension products like the videos and publications, those may have uses in the classroom, and we certainly hope they would. So we always welcome your feedback and let us know of your particular resource needs. If there's, boy, we really have a hard time conveying this concept, or this is something that I'd like to see visually, we can certainly get to that. And with that, I have one question from Beth that I'm sorry I missed it as I was going through. I didn't scroll down. Does it take biodiesel? What are we alluding to there, Beth? And we will make sure we address that one.
That was just to the forwarder. It's okay.
Oh, and I actually do a lot of, I've done a fair bit of work with biodiesel. It's a very interesting fuel, but you can address this, Peter. It certainly could take biodiesel, but that is one of the challenges. Biodiesel also has this energy balance. Actually, it's a pretty good energy balance, but it has a cost structure problem. And Montana has certainly had some experience with that in the agricultural sector, i.e. if you grow an oil seed, many times it's better to use that oil as a higher value product someplace else. As Peter was talking about, maybe it's very much akin to the wood products industry. So that, yes, it could take biodiesel, but at what price? Sort of dance around the question, but
yeah, if I might pipe in there, gasoline is largely benzene and toluene. I mean, those are two compounds that make gas, and it's very pure. Diesel can be a whole lot of different things because diesel is just something that you're compressing to the point to where it reaches a flash point and it explodes. And so the chemical makeup of diesel is highly variable. And biodiesel is chemically quite different than fossil fuel-based diesel. And one of its downsides is when it turns about 0 degrees centigrade, biodiesel turns into something of the consistency of shortening. And so it doesn't run really well. And there's questions about the longevity of diesel motors that run on biodiesel. Are you going to wear out the motor longer? So biodiesel is a very complicated thing because you can also run a diesel off of used deep fryer grease. I know quite a few people who do that, and I personally am a diesel fanatic. I have 2 diesel vehicles, and I've looked into all those things. So conceivably it could be, and actually that would be the ultimate, if the logging trucks and the equipment that brings this stuff to the refinery can fill up their fuel tanks right there from the material that comes out of there. That's a little bit of a dream because what Cool Planet produces, to my knowledge, is basically unrefined fuel, and it needs to be further refined based on what products went into it. But conceivably, it would be great if the entire industry that provides this material would be running off of the fuel that it's helping to collect.
All right, and I promise, Beth, we acknowledge that people learn best in 18-minute increments, so instead we take 50, but do we have any other questions that we'd like to bring into this? We sort of covered a lot of material, and I think you'll see that extension is tied into a broad array of topics. But are there any specific questions we can address in these final 10 minutes or so?
Well, either we put everybody asleep or we just awe them with this vast array of knowledge.
Yeah, I always enjoy webinars. You never know how your jokes or anything like that are going, right? So, but if there are no questions, Beth, I think I can speak for Peter that we both like to make ourselves accessible to the educators that are on the webinar and to the education team as a whole. And if there are opportunities to engage, if you'd like to participate in the development of any materials, you have a great idea for a video and you'd like us to get our videographer out there, well, hey, let us know and we're happy to work with you and figure out how it can fit into the broader BANR project.
Yeah, definitely. Just want to say thank you, Milt and Peter. And one comment with respect to the videos is that I know the education group is looking into developing potentially some TED education videos, and so I don't know if there's, you know, a possibility or an opportunity for some collaboration there with the extension group if we are both thinking about working on educational videos related to the BANR project.
Certainly, and I would suspect there's some overview. And wonderful thing about Extension is, you know, we have in-house media folks. You know, this is what they do. They're communicators. So yes, absolutely, I'd love to have that conversation.
Great, great. I think we just had some appreciative comments from the teachers, and thank you so much, Milt and Peter. That was great.
Well, thank you for spending a bit of time with us.
Yep.
Yeah, our pleasure. And if there's any way we can be of assistance, if any of the teachers want to put together field trips or you want to look at some of these forest conditions or any of these components, let us know. That's what we, in part, what we try to do is connect the dots, and you know, we know where field sites are and things like that. So we're certainly willing to work with any teachers that want to take their classes or their kids out to look at different components of these types of this process.